Hello and welcome to fxphd. My name is Tom Green and I'll be your class instructor for the next 10 weeks. I'm very excited to get started on these classes I created from scratch with you guys. Just to get started, I'll spend a couple minutes giving you guys a little backstory on me, and while doing that I strung together a sequence of clips that I'll play for y'all while kind of just go through my backstory of what I've done as an animator, creative director, and director. Currently, I'm a creative director at Shiloh in San Diego. I've been working here for the past 8, maybe 9 years. My job titles include everything from creating storyboards, directorial pitches, editorial, animation, live action directing, and really everything in between. As a small company, you kind of have to wear a lot of hats, and that's perfect because I like getting my hands dirty and working in all aspects of this industry. Typically on any given job, I work with a post team with a group of creatives anywhere from 1 to 2 to 10 to 12 artists at a time. And that could be per job. A lot of times I'm working on 2 to 3 jobs at a time, so it can grow and expand from there. A lot of times artists are in-house, a lot of times artists are out-of-house. It all depends on the job needs and what needs to be executed. Previously to working at Shiloh, I worked at Fuel Design up in Los Angeles. I got started in the industry interning at Digital Kitchen in Chicago well over a decade ago, creating storyboards for Budweiser, Nip Tuck, and multiple other TV series. After moving on from Digital Kitchen, I spent a year working at a post house in Chicago called Swell as the lead animator and designer there. I have a strong background in motion graphics. I really love to roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty working side by side with other animators in-house when jobs come in. One of my favorite things, I really enjoy the left brain, right brain thinking when it comes to mixing the artistic, creative animation side of After Effects against the right brain thinking aspect of figuring out the math, the numbers, the functionality, the expressions of what it takes to make something work. So all in all, I'm really excited to get started and really excited to share these classes I created with you guys specifically for fxphd, and look forward to working with you guys over the next 10 weeks. If you guys have any questions about the videos that have been playing over the previous couple minutes that I've worked on, feel free to ask me, shoot me a line, anything that you might be interested in how these videos were done, made, executed, amount of team, anything that kind of goes along with it. Worked on all of these projects and more than happy to answer and start a dialogue with you guys about any of these previous projects. Okay, so let's get to the task at hand. I think the best way to get going here is to play a video that kind of shows what we will be working on the next 4 to 5 classes here. Why don't I bring this up and we can play it, and I'll break it down after we watch it. So basically what we're watching here is a kind of homogenization of a couple different aspects of After Effects. What we see back here are these LED walls. I created them in After Effects with trapcode form, and the walls are projected back across the X, Y, and Z axis and then kind of reflected into the ground. I used a variety of different animations to kind of run through the form processor to kind of watch these, why don't I turn down the volume, to watch these grids kind of move up and down. So these aren't just individual lights going up and down. We're using 3D trapcode form and then running it through it to create these kind of dynamic animations that are moving and animating with the audio. And inside those comps, there's kind of smaller other areas of After Effects we'll focus on. As you can see here, these lights trickling down. I used particular to get this effect where they would dribble down. In the comp itself, where particular takes place, it looks nothing like these little dots. But then again, run through form, you'll see these little dots kind of trickling down. As well, I used a couple other animation techniques to get these X's and these X animations to pop up behind the square and animate out. And then also, when we pull out here, you see this equalizer moving to the beat of the music. I used sound keys and ran the audio you hear in this spot to project the equalizers to move up and down. So that's what we're going to cover in the first 2 class is just getting these LED walls built, assembled, animated, watching the camera spinning around with it. After we get that built, we're going to go in and import our 3D render passes. Now, the 3D render passes are so we can composite this car. I think what I'm going to be handing you guys is we got about 20 different passes, 15 to 20 passes. We've got a beauty pass, we have normals, Fresnel matte, Fresnel pass, normals, RGBs, UV passes, you name it, we got it. So we're going to take those passes to composite the car and make it feel like it's part of the world. Now, one of the coolest things, one of the coolest passes we'll probably mess with that I like, is it's called a UV pass. And as you can see, there are these lines. I shouldn't say lines. There's these LED walls running across our car, and you can see it running across the contours in the form of the car. What I did is, or what I didn't do, but what the renderer did for me was he created a pass. It's called a UV pass, and it basically looks like the shape of the car, and then you can run any kind of comp you want into it, any kind of 2D pass into it, and it will project over the surface of whatever that object is, whether it's a sphere, someone's face, a car, a tree. And you can put whatever flat 2D object in there, and it will run across the contours of this 3D shape. So as you can see here, as we're moving, even though we are creating these lines, these LED lines in After Effects, they're actually showing up and moving across the contour and tracking with it, as you can see here. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool that you're able to take these elements and kind of integrate the two worlds from 3D and 2D together. So once we get the car composited, and the other passes too, is you see the car spinning, we're getting these kind of, these passes, these motion blur passes. And what that is through is, we were also given a UV vector pass, or I shouldn't say a vector pass, a motion vectors pass. And what this does, it calculates the movement of the object or the camera. And it just really looks like a blue, green, yellow, kind of rainbowy thing. You never want to composite with it, but what that is there's information in there that you can run through plugins. Real Smart Motion Blur, there's some through Composite Wizard, but there's plugins that will read that information and give you the correct kind of motion blur to make it feel like this car is spinning and matching the world around it. That's what we'll be covering after we get the LED walls built. And then finally, you can see these custom lens flares kind of filling in the world around it. You know, every time I work on a composite, I like to, wrap things up, get these little flares in here, get these little details, these little particulates. It kind of takes it from a world that looks CG flat and perfect and kind of, put small blemishes on it, making it look a touch more real. We also put on, if you can see, I put a little bit of film grain on it, so these kind of vignettes or these gradients of color back here don't look so perfect. Because to me, whenever there's a level of CG out there where it looks real, or I shouldn't say it looks real, but it looks like CG. It looks like someone rendered a CG car. It looked like someone rendered a CG building or a CG horse, or I don't know what it would be. But there's a level you kind of want to take it past that, so it just doesn't look like it was kind of taken out of the box CG world and given it these kind of imperfections. When we freeze this frame here, we've added a little bit of I used a plugin, this lens flare plugin that gives you these, that we'll go over in the next couple classes, but gives you these kind of irises coming around the lights. You can see from the lens flare here, these kind of different colors shimmying across the screen, and then again with these little particulates in here and the motion blur, there's imperfections in here that I like. There's imperfections that make it feel like it's something beyond just your regular CG composite. And I think that those are the things I kind of want to touch on over the next 10 courses. There's kind of a level of CG, not a level of CG, but there's a level of finish, and then there's a level you can always push it afterwards and just get these imperfections in here. Even when I was working on this, which we'll go over again, you can see different lights are different shapes, different colors. The bulbs aren't perfect. That's because imagine this was actually filmed. Of course, some lights might be dimmer, some might be brighter, one might go out all of a sudden. But those are the imperfections I like to kind of add into this to make it look like it was considered. So let's get to work and build this thing. All right, first things first, I'm just going to open up Cinema 4D for a moment, just to show you where our camera came from and giving you the idea of how we got all the movements. So as you can see here, I put a temporary car in here. It's unrendered, it's just a grayscale car. And I put the LED walls in here for placement, just so I would know as I was animating the camera where the walls would be at all times, where I would see them in the Cinema 4D screen, they would appear in my After Effects screen. And I did that just by keeping the placement of the nulls one-to-one where they'll be in After Effects. As you can see here, wherever I have my center point of the wall, I also placed a null. You can see right here, we have this wall, this LED representation of the LED wall, and the coordinates here, negative 1150, 700, negative 350. I have the exact same coordinates piped in right here, so the null will match exactly where the LED wall is. And then what I did was add an external compositing tag. And what this does, it allows you to save out a .aec file to bring into After Effects. Basically, anything you apply this external compositing tag to will allow you to bring it into After Effects. Anything from nulls to cameras. And I'll just show you really quick. It's really easy. Just right-click, go to Cinema 4D Tags, and go down to external compositing tag. And that's all you got to do. If you want, you can just option drag it over to the next side. I'm sorry, just Apple option move it over, and you can copy it and drag it onto anything that you want to bring into After Effects, including your cameras and your lights. So in saying that, you can see all these lines going all over the place. This is the course our camera is taking to film our car. And let me play it again. You can see all these lines. This is the path again. If we could freeze frame every moment and every position of the camera, these lines would represent where the camera is at any given point in the timeline. And the way I did this was, there's really just there's two different kind of cameras you can bring into After Effects. You can bring in your traditional camera. So put this as a T for traditional, and as you move around, I can move all over the screen, and the camera will move and translate wherever I want it to. Knowing that the car was going to be the center point of our spot the entire time, I wanted to create a camera with a target point. And what this does is, why don't I get out of my scene here, and let's put this as, so I know that it's our target camera, and we'll switch to our target camera here. The camera will follow this target point wherever it goes. So if I move this target, to the right side of the screen, the left side of the screen, if I move it up or down, the camera will follow it at all times. Or you could do it the reverse way, like I did. I left the target in place and just simply move the camera all around the car, so I would always be focused on the car and never had to continually worry about translating the camera to follow that car. So that's basically how we came up with our camera movement. From here, we're ready to export our .aec file to bring into After Effects. So all you got to do is, go to your render settings, make sure the frame range is set from 0 to 360 or whatever your frame range is. Ours is 0 to 360, so just make sure it's the all frames there. And then when we go from here, when we go to save, set your destination point. I just have mine in camera data. So make sure we have fxphd camera animation version 1. We'll just save this in there. And then just click save. You have options for After Effects, Nuke, Final Cut, Motion Shake. This is obviously an After Effects class, so we will pick After Effects. And then just click Relative, Include Timeline Markers, and Include 3D Data. I've never had to use Include Timeline Markers, but let's just go ahead and save it. Save it in here. Our AEC file is saved. And now what I'll show you is just bringing this AEC file into After Effects. Let's drop it in. Open up our comp, and you can't really see, there is no PNG sequence rendered for it, so we can just turn this off. And you can see how our camera, we've not selected our camera. Where, you know what I did? I accidentally exported our static camera here. So After Effects is following our static camera. I'm going to turn that off. Now what we can do is we see our After Effects camera following the same path that our Cinema 4D camera was following. So let me go back to it here, and you can see it's doing the exact same movement. You can see how originally the camera wasn't moving in After Effects and it's not moving here. That's because I forgot to turn that camera off. But we fixed that. So yeah, you can see that the camera is moving the exact same way in Cinema 4D that it is in After Effects. And this is incredibly useful because now we're going to go ahead and use these different points. They have these different nulls to set up our LED walls. So first things first, let's create a new comp, and we will label it LED underscore animation underscore build. This comp is going to be a big comp. It's going to be 6,900 pixels by 1,400 pixels, 360 frames in length. Basically, every comp we create for these LED walls are going to be 360 frames in length. And the height is always going to be 1,400 because the panels are going to stay one-to-one height-wise. The only thing that's going to change is the width across the board as we kind of break these things up and create the left, right, and middle panel. So let's go ahead. We have this panel built. And what we're going to want to do is just create some sort of junk mat, some sort of object in here. So we know that when we're setting up our LED walls that our shapes are kind of staying one-to-one. So I'm just going to sit here. I'm just going to create a couple circles as reference points. And there we go. A couple nice circles. Me being perfectionist, let's make sure these circles do not fall off the screen and set those up. There we go. So we got a couple circles there for our placeholders. Let's go ahead and drop this into our animation build. From here, we're going to create another comp, the exact same size as this composition. This comp we're going to name Form Assemble. Basically, what we're creating here is two different compositions. One that is going to have our form plugin in it. This will be this comp. That's why we're naming it Form. Later on, we're going to create a solid and run the Form particle system across here. This comp, however, is the comp that we're going to be doing all our animation in, all our graphs, equalizer bars, and everything that will be moving across the LED wall. So once we have our form wall built, what we're going to want to do is go to Form Assemble and drop our LED build into here. Now what we're going to want to do is break this up into our left, right, and mid panels. So let's go ahead, create a new composition. We will label this composition left panel underscore build. And like I said earlier, everything's going to be the same height and the same length. We're just going to change the width. So let's have the width on this 2,000 by 300 pixels. And what we're going to do is drop the Form Assemble into here. And then we're going to reposition this at negative 1,150 pixels. So there you go. This is representation of our left panel build. Let's go ahead, create another one. We're going to label this one mid panel build. Same exact dimensions as our left panel build. And what we're going to do here is drop our Form Assemble into this comp as well. Next, you guessed it, we're going to create our right panel build. And now what we're going to want to do, same thing as before, drop our Form Assemble into that comp as well. And what we're going to want to do is reposition this comp at 3,450 pixels. Okay, now that we have our panels built, let's go back to our composite that we brought in from Cinema 4D earlier. Bring this up to our output layer, and let's just relabel this class 1 underscore output. So what we have here is, we have our nulls. If you remember, we brought these nulls in Cinema 4D, back wall, left wall, and right wall. So what we're going to want to do is bring in our 3 panels and align them with these nulls. I'm going to turn these lights off. These were brought in from After Effects. We don't necessarily need these, so I'm going to turn those off. And let's make all 3 of these panels a 3D layer. So what we're going to do is line up each panel with each respective null. First, we'll start with the mid panel, representing our back wall. Our position points are 0, -700, and 800. So I'm just going to copy and paste that to this comp. There we go. From there, we can take our left panel and line that one up with our left After Effects panel. Copy and paste the positional points and turn it on. That would help. And now our comp is aligned with the null. But the thing is, we're going to have to go ahead and rotate this panel. So let's tilt it back in space and bring it to 90 degree turn on the y-axis. Now you can see already, this is why I created, or why we created these temp shapes earlier. You can see if we would have rotated it the opposite way, -90 degrees, the circles wouldn't have lined up and we wouldn't have known exactly how this thing was going to line up in our place. So that's just why I put those circles in there, so we would have a guide layer. So we know we need to turn our left panel to 90 degrees on the Y rotation axis. From there, let's go to our right panel, turn it on, reposition it to align with this null, copy and paste the keyframes to our right panel. And again, we're going to rotate this. We're going to rotate this panel. See, as you can see here, this circle's not aligning. Probably because I didn't turn it. But let's turn it 90 degrees and see. Yep, -90 degrees, my bad. Turn it -90 degrees. And now you can see this circle has aligned with that back panel. So the good news is we got our panels built, we got them assembled. You can see our camera spinning around this world, and we know all our panels are lining up. We're pretty far off from the final output of what we've created earlier, but at least we're beginning to see movement and we're beginning to see shape from this render we were referencing earlier, or from this video we were referencing earlier. You know, we have the camera moving around and aligning, and we have the camera moving around and shooting these walls here, just like we have here, only they are obviously circles. But no worries, we will move on and get the form walls assembled next. Let's go to our form assemble layer. Let's go ahead and turn our LED animation build off and create a new solid, label it form. And let's go to our plugins, apply trap code form. Let's see, this is a really wide comp, so let's see how much we can fit in screen here to view what we're doing. So what we're going to do is, let's just get our form set up, and then I'll kind of run over what this plugin does and what it's capable of. Size, let's set our size to 6,900 pixels. Basically what this is doing is creating our a grid that's going to be the size of our composition. We could have it 2,000 pixels wide, and as you can see, the pixels are only going out 2,000 pixels. But knowing that our composition is 6,900 pixels by 1,400 pixels, that's exactly the dimensions we want to create here. So let's go 6,900 pixels by 1,400 pixels. Not 140, but 1,400. And let me turn this off. And let's see how wide we can get this for now. What I'm going to do, let's bring the particle size up a little bit so we can see it in our screen a little more. You can see the particles beginning to show up here, but again, it's just such a big comp, it's hard to see it in this scene. So let's see how much we can fit it up to our screen here. And then last, let's turn the particle depth to 1. Basically what this is doing is dropping all the particles back in Z space. But since we're using this as just a simple panel, we don't need our particles going back in space. If you see here, I can change it from 1, I can change it to 10, and you can see on the edges here, the particles will kind of drop further back in space. But again, let's just drop this to 1. Now what we're going to want to do is decide how many particles exist in the parameters or in the size of the comp we've created. Right now there's 70 particles, there's 70 columns, of particles going across. For our X value, we're going to want to bump this up to 124. And for our Y value, we're going to want to change this to 27. And for Z, we'll just leave it at 1, because again, we're not using our Z space. So now what we have is a very evenly laid out grid representing our LED screen. Let's go ahead and change the size to, let's do 18. Now we can see our particles a little bit better. So now what we've created here is our LED wall that we were seeing in the video earlier. But what I was mentioning is we got to take that animation, this comp that we created, to project to inject into this form plugin. So I'm going to turn this off for the moment again. And what we're going to want to do is go down to our layer maps. And what we're going to pick here is we're going to go to our color alpha, and we're going to change our layer to LED animation build. Nothing's changed, but what that means, we have to change the alpha from RGB to RGB to RGBA to RGBA. So now, as you can see here, nothing has happened again. That's because we need to map it over our XY axis. So now once we change that, now as you can see, the particles are reading our matte back here on the XY axis. So let me turn this off. So you could change it to anything. You could change it just to alphas. You can change it to color. If we wanted to change the colors of our circles, the colors of the dots would change. We can go ahead here and change the sizes of our pixels. We could change them to different kinds of particles to fill out the circle here. Or if we wanted to, let's just do a quick example, we could, triple up, quadruple up the amount of particles in this comp. So let's just do a quick test. We'll multiply it by 4, multiply the particles in Y by 4. And, these particles are so dense now, it's totally engulfing this circle. So why don't we shrink this down? I'll shrink this particles down to 5. And now you can see we just have these tighter, denser circles. This isn't going to look very good for our LED animation build. So let's go back to how we originally had it set up. Change the particles to 18. And let's divide this by 4 since we multiplied it by 4. And then same with this. Divide it by 4. And bump our size back to 18. I put our sphere feather down to 18. So there we go. So now what we have is basically anything that we put into this comp. If we want to drop these circles down, let's move the circles down, our form wall will build it. And then, you guessed it, when we go back out to our output, our circles are being projected across these walls. So basically now we have a very strong setup for the camera to follow the animation, or for the camera to view these walls, and anything we do here in our animation will be pumped through this form assemble comp and then projected into our panel builds, and then the results will be out here in this 3D world in After Effects. So let's go back to our form assemble and set up a couple more things. Okay, let's go ahead and create the equalizer bar that we see moving up and down in the background of our video. So let's create a new comp, equalizer underscore source, and we'll make this comp 575 pixels by 2,800 pixels tall. And what we're going to want to do is create a new solid, and we can just name it EQ. And what we're going to want to do is move the anchor point to 2,800. And then what we're going to want to do is slide this solid back down to the bottom of the comp. Now what we're going to want to do is set a couple keyframe values. What we're going to do is move forward to frame 43. And let's go to scale. Let's unclick the constraint properties. And we're going to set a keyframe and set the values at 85 and 50%. Now what we're going to do is go forward to frame 53 in our timeline, and let's set a couple more keyframes at 80. We'll leave this at 85 and set the Y value to 0. And what we're going to do is set a hold frame here. And then let's scroll down in the timeline to frame 276. And what we're going to want to do is set another keyframe and keep it at 100%. And then go to frame 286 and set our keyframe back to 85 and 50. So what we can do is, we don't want this to jump as it jump down to its position. We want it to slide down to its position. So what we can do is, we don't have to put a hard hold on this, and we can just let this drop back down to its position. There you go. So I guess you guys are wondering why we set these random keyframes up. Pretty simple. I'll show you in our video. Where do we have it here? I know we brought it up. We have the EQ. The EQ comes up and begins to animate for the first part of the screen, but then it disappears to make room for these other animations to come through. And then once again, the screen fills up to full white and then drops down and turns back into the equalizers. What we're doing is basically setting up the birth and death of these EQ to the scale and size of the EQ value. So let's go ahead and just drop this into our source 2D layer. Now what we're going to do is go into our LED animation. We can finally turn off our circles and drop our EQ source into here. Now what we're going to want to do is go to position on the EQ source. Click position, and we're going to want to go up to animation. And what we're going to do is separate dimensions. What this does, if you notice, it separates our X and Y into individual dimensions, so we can control just the X value or just the Z value when keyframing. Now what we're going to want to do is change the X value to 287.5. So what this does is, it moved our EQ all the way to the left side of the screen. So what we're going to want to do is duplicate this multiple times by a value of 575. So I'm going to do plus 575, and then just do this across the board. Add plus 575, and continue till the screen is completely full. So tell you what, I'm going to go offline for a second and continue filling up this screen, because I know you guys don't really care to watch this right now. I can get back to you once the screen is filled up. I'll talk to you in 1 minute. Okay, now that we have all our EQ bars set up, now what we're going to want to do is offset them in our timeline by 1 frame each. So what I'm going to do is grab each of these keyframes, step forward in the timeline, let's drag this out a little bit, and just offset each layer in the timeline by 1 frame to offset our animation. So let's continue through. There we go. Almost there. Let's just get these last 2 set up. There we go. We have each of these offset in the timeline, prepped for music we're going to bring in next. So let's go ahead and grab a music track. I have one prepped that I've been using. Let me grab it. I believe it's in classes, audio file here. And here's the track. It's just a quick 15-second track. So I feel like this song had a good amount of kind of bass and treble in it to instigate and, you know, give us a springboard for us to animate these equalizer bars to. So I'm going to open it up, drop it in my audio folder, and from there I'm going to delete our circles that we weren't using earlier and create a new solid, and let's call this sound keys. And I'm going to make this red just so I can spot it out in our composition whenever I need it. Do is go to my effects, apply sound keys, and then what I also want to do is grab our audio track and drop it into our file here. Okay, so let's take a quick moment to kind of figure out what this sound keys plugin actually does and how we will apply it to what we are building here. So let's open up the plugin, and you can see there's a couple input channels here. Let's go to audio layer and select our audio track we brought in. And as you can see, let's see if we can zoom in here. We're already getting results. We're already watching the values move up and down as it reads the audio track here, the audio wave down here. We can see that the audio track has a waveform, and as the audio track gets louder here, we can see the values moving up higher. So this is a great point in the audio track to kind of show the subtler, softer sounds. And then right as it hits this point here, right around frame 64, 65, the bass and sub bass really just kick up. So what we want to do is isolate a specific part of this audio channel and get it to sync up with our EQ animation that's moving up and down. So what we can do here, let's just go through a couple of different parameters that exist. We can kind of exponentially increase the values of different areas of the audio track that we may want to isolate and extract some keyframe data from. We can extract the sub bass. There's very little sub bass in this music at this point. So even if I kick this up, there's not much, it's not going to do much to the values here. So let's just drop back to 1. The bass, however, there is plenty of information. So we can kick this up, pull it up all the way. And right now we're just blowing this thing off the charts. It's not really necessary. We can slide it back in the timeline here though. And here you can see where we're getting some results by kicking up the values of the bass. If you guys select a track that has a really loud bass or a softer bass, or there's a specific part of the animation with some bass you want to isolate, this might be what you want to do. Increase the bass here so you can isolate it with, which I should point out here, these range selectors. These range selectors here, if I zoom in a little more, you can probably see these green boxes. And this is the range selectors. You get 3 of them. And you can kind of pick and isolate different areas of the sound that this box, where we set up this box in the Sound Keys plugin. So if I want to lower, I don't want to lower the sub bass. If I want to lower the bass, now this range selector is really doing nothing because none of the audio, nothing in the audio graph is getting high enough to make it into this box, except right now, which we would get just a little pop in our animation. So what we want to do is, just run over a couple other things. You can control the mid-tone values as well if you want to isolate that, and you can control the treble. Let me move this over and pull out wider so we can kind of see what's happening in totality as well. Now, what we can do too is, let me scrub forward in the timeline. We can raise the graph and you can see it's a little more jagged and a little more choppy. What you can do is smooth it out, and that's what the Q smoothness is for. As we slide this up, you can see that the different heights in the audio values are beginning to smooth out along each other and equal out into something that's not as fragmented and jarring, possibly creating a little more abstract or maybe some animation pops that we might not want in our EQs. It's really kind of up to you guys how you want it to look. But for me personally, I don't want the EQ to pop up and down. I kind of want to have a little smoother movement to its animation. So now that we kind of have this dialed in, I went ahead earlier just because it took me 10, 20 minutes to kind of figure out where I wanted to set my range selector and set my bass, mid, and treble at so I could get the animation to move properly. If you guys want to take a moment to find that sweet spot for your music track, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead and change the values to where I wanted it, where I found earlier, to get our audio to line up with our EQ graph animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the scale to 0.7, and I'm going to drop the smoothness all the way to 1. And then from there, I'm going to keep the treble at 0.8 and leave all the other values where I kind of had them originally. Were they at 0? No, we don't want them at 0. We want them at 1. And then for the range selector, I'm going to just drop it and move my range selector to 3430 by 928. and then we're going to move the opposite corner to 4,650 by 1218. Okay, so now as you can see, I have my range selector selecting the trebles down here. So this is pretty nice. It's nothing jarring. It's nothing that's going to get our EQ bar animation to go flying out of control. It's a relatively reserved animation that we're using in the opening of our spot. So now what we're going to want to do is adjust our output and input max. So let me pull this over so we can see it a little better. And now what I want to do is point something out here. With our fall off, we can change it so our keyframes will drop instantly, linear, or exponentially. And then the other option, which I want to go in here and adjust, is our output max. We can control our keyframes. We can control our keyframes when they're baked out to be from a value from 0 to 100, 0 to 1, -1 to +1, 0 to 360. This is useful if you're doing something that was going in like a radial fashion, or just half that, you know, if you wanted to do just a 180 twist. What we're going to go to is go to custom, and we're going to set our minimum value to 2,800 and just leave our max at 0. So now we got everything set up. And what we're going to do is open up our range selector and bring this back to the beginning of our timeline. And now what we're going to do is just hit apply. So it's going to take a moment, but basically what this does is SoundKeys is going to read this audio file and bake out a set of keyframes based on the parameters we've set up here. So as you can see, we have a keyframe breaked out for every specific point in our audio timeline. We scroll along here and the values are changing. You know, 1,873, it's moving up to 2,170. Let's go to an earlier point and you can see it as well. You know, when the music's almost dead, the output's at 2,800, and then as we kind of move up in the timeline, it starts changing to 2,366, 2,500. You get the idea. So now what we're going to do is connect and use this keyframe data that we've extracted from our audio file and apply it to our equalizer, so we can get our equalizer to move up and down, kind of similar in fashion to the beat of the music as I referenced in our opening part of the spot. So let's go ahead and let's isolate our keyframes. I'm going to hit U just so we can see our keyframes here, and let's turn on one of our equalizer bars. I'm going to move over here so we can see it. And now what we're going to want to do is hit P for position. And if you remember earlier, we separated the X and Y values. And the reason I did this is because now that we have these keyframe values here, I can connect just the Y value to these keyframes, allowing the EQ to move just up and down, as opposed to if we had the X and Y position connected to it, it would be moving left and right and up and down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Option on the little time clock here, grab the pick whip and attach it to output. So now what this does is any value that is here on the sound key will be run into the Y value here. Now as you can see, the EQ bar isn't moving up very much. You can't even see it. And part of this is my bad because I gave you guys the wrong values earlier for the anchor points. What we want to do is take the anchor point here and change it from 1,400 to 2,100. Now what that's going to do is bump up our EQ bar so it's always in scene, but what it will allow us to do is keep it below the horizon line at the beginning of the scene and then begin to pop up like you see it here. So now what we're going to want to do is go ahead and pick whip that Y value of every single EQ bar to this, as you can see here. Again, bringing up the EQ bars, even though you can see them coming up at the same time, we're going to figure out how to offset that in a second. So how about I sign off for a minute, pick whip the rest of these values to this output, as you guys should too, and we'll get back to it in 1 second. Okay, now that we have all our EQ source files connected to our output, as you can see here, I have all of them connected through an expression, through pick whipping them all to the output. You can see all the values are the same, 2,800 across the board. So let's close this for a second. I think we can turn sound keys off now that we're going to be working with our EQ bars. And let's frame up our EQ bars for the moment. So if we hit spacebar, we can see all these bars are kind of popping up all at the same time. So what we're going to have to do is kind of offset their values a little bit. And this is incredibly easy. So what I'm going to do is go to the middle bar just for placement. I'm going to hit P, toggle down the Y expression. And what we can do is we can do either multiply or divide this value by a very small increment. So what I'm going to do is, just for example, let's do times 0.8. So what this is going to do is this is going to multiply our value by 0.8. See how this brings up our EQ bar a tiny bit? So now we're getting a little bit of variance, and the bars are changing kind of exponentially as they come up. So this guy's kind of off at a different time, moving up at a different timing than the other EQ bars are, but still moving to the same beat of the music. So what we can do here is we can go ahead and just keep playing with this. I'm going to change this one to times 0.6, and we see how this one brings it up even higher. And you can also divide it. So let's do one where we divide it by a very small value. Let's divide it by 0.9. So as you can see, this one dropped the EQ bar down a tiny bit. So what I suggest is you just kind of go through, and we'll kind of pick just a couple different values to give our EQ bar just a little bit of variance. So it just feels, you know, so it has a little more texture. It doesn't look like a giant bar moving up. There's going to be so much animation, so much movement happening in our scene later on that it doesn't take much. It's just going to take a little bit of value change to give like some shape and dimension to these bars. So I think I almost have this left side done. Let's do this one 0.75. Oop, that one might be too much. Let's just do 0.7. 0.7 seems like it's too much too, huh? Let's go 0.95. I am not sure where this bar went. Oh, there we go. So let's do 0.95. There we go. Now we got it adjusted better. So now you can see this whole left side. The bars are beginning to come into frame as the music gets louder. So now what we're going to do is let's do this to the left side of this, the right side of the EQ bar as well. I'm going to bring it up to a point where the music's a little bit higher. We can see the bar. There we go. That's a good beat. There we go. And let's adjust this one as well. I don't even want to adjust this one. Let's grab this bar. Let's maybe divide this one by 0.9 and see if that does much. There we go. And let's do the same with this. Maybe multiply this one by 0.2. Maybe not 0.2. What did we have it at? Let's go by 0.7, and it still feels a little too high. I'm trying to get, what I'm trying to do here, guys, is basically just create this kind of apex where the highest EQ bars are in the center, and then it kind of fades down a little bit on the left and right side. So I think I'm going to leave this bar where it's at, and then just take this one here and see if we can divide this one by a small number and drop it down a little bit. Let's see if we can go more. Oop, that might be too much. And that seems just about right. I'm going to go drop this guy down as well. Bring this one down to 0.85. Oh, there was a hidden guy down there. Let's adjust this one so he's at. Divide him by 0.85. There we go. What do we want to do? Maybe we bring this bar up just a tiny bit. And let's see what happens if we just turn this off. Yeah, I think we're going to have to multiply this one by a value just to get it a little higher in frame to kind of compete with this other bar. Let's keep going. Maybe the magic number is 6.5. There we go. Maybe drop it down to 63. Oh, sorry. Let's go 67. There we go. So now we have our EQ bar beginning to come in. And if you remember, I asked you guys to offset your EQ bars in the timeline earlier. The reason for this is when they come into frame, they begin to shuffle in. So when the music starts, we'll see the bars flutter across frame. And then, if you remember, we keyframe the EQ bars to disappear at one point. This is to make room for in the next class, we're going to have our animation flutter across left and right side of the composition. And then as it should, yep, the EQ bar pops right back up again. Okay, let's go ahead and create the grid texture now. I'm going to go ahead and close these down to make room for our solid so we can see it. Let's create a new solid. I'm going to label it grid and put it at the bottom of the comp. Let's go over here in Effects panel and find the grid and apply it to our solid. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see exactly what we're doing here. Bring up grid, and I'm going to go change the anchor point to 3,449. Oop, not delete it, and then change the Y value to 940. I'm going to change the corner to 4,023 and 1,353. Then I'm going to change the border to 51. So we got this really thick line here now. And what that's going to do is give us kind of an edge. You can see this edge. We're creating like kind of a container or something to hold our pixels in. Not, I wouldn't say a container, but just some borders to hold our EQ lines in. So let's go back into our LED build. Now what we got to do is create something to break up these lines. So what we're going to do is go ahead and create a new composition. And we're going to create this composition 6,900 by 1,400. Let's label this grid flash underscore source. Create a new solid. I'm going to label it grid, and I'm going to apply the grid texture one more time. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the anchor on this to 3,414 by 700. I'm going to do the corner at 3,533 by 768. So I got these really dense lines in here. And then I'm going to put the border at 34. So I got these really dense lines in here. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and create an adjustment layer. And I'm going to throw the invert channel or the invert plugin on it. I'm going to slide forward on this, and I'm going to change it to alpha in the channels. So now what we're going to do is just every 2 keyframes, I'm going to invert the opacity. I'll just do a quick demo right now to give you an idea of what we're going to do. So it'll flash back and forth. Hopefully not giving us a seizure, but enough to get some texture across. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste these keyframes across the board. I don't know if you guys want to watch me copy and paste these across the board, so why don't we take a moment, I'll copy and paste them and get back to you in 1 minute. Okay, now that I'm back, I duplicated all the keyframes across the span of 360 frames, and I'm going to do a little RAM preview right now to give you an idea of what's happening. What we're going to do is use this as a Luma mat in our LED composition. So I'm going to go to our LED animation, we're going to go to our grid slash source, I'm going to move it down, and I'm going to throw it right here at the bottom. Now what I'm going to do is Luma mat, I guess we could alpha mat it with the grid we created. Now it's a little sloppy looking, but it's okay because we know it's going to be pumped through our form plugin and just give us some kind of random values here. So this kind of gives us a nice look, a nice shape, kind of these lines that will contain our EQ walls. So our last step in today's course is to get the opacity of the grid to flash with the sound keys of our audio file. So let's go ahead real quick. We'll go back up to sound keys. I'm going to close range selector 1. I'm going to go open up range selector 2. I'm going to isolate the sound key plugin and just do a quick RAM preview here. I'm going to keep the range selector where it's at, but if you remember, we had our output input max from 0 to 100. Earlier we had it at custom going into the thousands, but since our opacity value is anywhere from 0 to 100, we want our output to be anywhere from 0 to 100. So it's as simple as that. I'm going to go to the beginning of the timeline. I'm going to hit apply, and we're going to wait a moment as the plugin reads the audio wave. Now that it's read it, I'm going to hit you on the timeline, and you can see we have a whole new set of values here. 67, 72, 84, 78. And this is because we chose values between 0 and 100. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to hit 0 on opacity, pick whip the opacity of the grid to the opacity of the sound keys. I'm going to turn off the sound keys. Now as you can see, our opacity is flashing to the beat of the music as well. So if we go into our output, we can see we're getting this nice texture from this grid here to line up with our EQ bars. So that's it for today's course. I would suggest you guys spend the week messing around with different audio files, different EQ bars, maybe different grids, and next week we'll move on to finishing out the animation and adding some variety to our form walls. We'll dive into particular and work on some trickling down effects. We'll work with the Ease Wiz script and also add in some secondary animation on the back walls here to flush it out. On top of that, we'll go into form, create some custom lights, and create some variants in the LED walls here, so it just doesn't feel so clean and crisp. But I would suggest over the weekend, again, just going ahead and messing with a couple different animations now that we have our base animation set up. I'll talk to you guys next week. Take care.